Welcome to Ryan Chats With, a podcast where we get to speak with leaders and game changers all around our community and all around our nation. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, which means it's time for a special edition of the Ryan Chats With podcast, the Mental Health Check-In, with our friends over at Brooklane.
What is up, guys? It's Ryan Smetzer, and welcome to our fourth and final installment of the Mental Health Check-In special series of our Ryan Chats With podcast. We've been tackling all sorts of topics, from anxiety to depression to how the pandemic has impacted mental health as a whole. And our final topic is one that is a little bit on the heavier side of things, but we definitely want to tackle it head on and break down the stigma that it can't be talked about, or that it has to be avoided or spoken in a certain tone or a different way. And so we have got the best of the best to talk about it from Brooklane. We've got our licensed graduate professional counselor from Brooklane Health Services, Shannon Snowman. We are going to be talking about suicide. Shannon, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing, Ryan?
Good. It is great to have you on here. Like I said, suicide is a heavy topic, but it's a topic that we really need to talk about and learn how to talk about. Not just have a discussion like this, but to be able to get out in the community and have those conversations about suicide and learn how to talk to those who may be having suicidal thoughts. And so, my first question to you is, suicide being a heavy topic is still kind of addressed, especially in recent time, in the media. It's talked about on television shows, on social media, on a lot of things that especially cater to the younger demographic. But there's still that stigma that, we got to kind of talk about it from a distance, or talk about it in a way that, isn't too touchy, or, really we got to kind of avoid it because it almost seems like a taboo kind of subject. So how do we approach the conversation of suicide simply as a society? How do we start?
I think that's an excellent question. And a lot of people, when they sit back and they think about suicide and how to talk to their loved ones and their family members and just their friends and colleagues, they're wondering, how do I start? And the first part is really there's no wrong way to start. And that's super important to know. However you approach this, approach it with love, understanding, appreciate that whoever you're talking to is going through a rough time possibly. And, just approaching it from, mental health awareness, just like your segments are coming from, approaching it from, hey, I'm here for you. And, let's talk about suicide, and let's really break down the stigma as a whole. And as a society, maybe bringing this up more, in our environments, in our workplace, in our schools, really just having the conversation of, what is the difference between self-harm and suicide? And how do we know when people may be feeling this way?
Gotcha. And, how do we identify those signs of suicidal thoughts? I think that, not just with regards to youth and teenagers and young adults, but really, adults as well. How do we identify that, okay, maybe our friend, our loved one, our family member may be having suicidal thoughts, or maybe kind of developing that action plan towards suicide or towards self-harm?
Mm-hmm. So there are actually a variety of different things that can indicate that someone is considering maybe suiciding. And, the important thing is to remember that even if someone displays these signs, they may not actually be thinking of this. So it's important not to assume. But you can find a list of different resources on, when someone is thinking of suicide, and they may be displaying these things. And so some of them may be on the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And so they might include isolation. Maybe they aren't playing something like a sport that they used to play. They aren't getting together with their friends. And this includes adults. Adults have hobbies too. So when we're thinking about, when we're interacting with somebody, are they really saying, I don't want to be with somebody. I don't want to be with anybody right now. I just want to be by myself. And this is not in their nature. Now, this isn't to call out, all introverts, right? This is not to say that introverts aren't a thing. And that sometimes people say, hey, I don't want to be around people, and that's my preference. It's not saying that all introverts are thinking of suicide. That's saying that, this is somebody that normally says, I want to be around people, or I want to be around this person. And then all of a sudden, they don't want to be around anybody. They are good by themselves. They're like, I don't want to be around anybody, and I'm just feeling really not myself. Another indication could be that, as well as not being interested in their hobbies or being around people, maybe they aren't doing their self-care like they used to. Maybe you notice that they aren't dressing in the things that make them feel like themselves, right? And they aren't maybe showering or doing that self-care item. And so parents might notice a change in self-care. Now, obviously, we have, different stages of childhood. They might not be wanting a bath or wanting a shower or whatever. But this is something more like, while they once brushed their teeth every day and showered every other day or something, now they're going a week without showering, and they are struggling to get out of bed, and they are exhausted, and they don't care about even gaming with their friends. That's a huge one, especially for teens. The gaming community is very strong, very active, and very supportive. And so if they're not logging into their games to talk to people on Xbox or whatever platform they use, that's a clear indication as well.
Yeah. And I think too, like a lot of times we run into the phrase, it's okay not to be okay. And I think especially because, what I hear, especially from younger people, is those conversations where they say, hey, I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling, like I'm in a dark spot. And then you hear the response of, well, it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. Or, hey, it's going to, there's just going to be this magical moment where it all just kind of turns around. And so then you're put in that spot where you're like, okay, well, instead of saying it's going to be okay, what are the alternatives here? What kind of conversations do you see as more successful towards, helping those who may be having suicidal thoughts or tendencies of, things are really dark right now and I'm considering ending my life?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. We do tend to say everything's going to be okay. And, looking at our culture even, how are you doing? Fine. How are you doing? Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are the appropriate answers, right? The appropriate answers that we all give.
Yeah.
Even the adults do it, right? Because, we're taught this is what you do when you're around people. And so,
Right.
the reality is everything is not okay at times, and just like if they've experienced a loss of a friend, or maybe their pet has passed away or something like that, or they've gone through a breakup and it really stinks, or they didn't get into the college that they wanted, or, whatever it is. Some things aren't always fixable, always adjustable. And so maybe what we say is, how can I help you right now? And sometimes that might look a little bit different than we kind of view it as. For example, when you're talking to somebody and you're saying, how can I help you right now? That answer might be, I could really go for a burger. And as silly as that sounds in the moment, when you're talking about suicide, I could really go for a burger. What? You're hungry? Like that really helps you? It might. It might actually help somebody in that moment to get some food, to get a shower, to get some sleep. And they might think, maybe I'm not ready quite yet. I'm not ready to make this choice right now. I need a minute. I need a meal. I need to talk to somebody. Maybe they need help to talk to somebody that they love. Maybe you're talking to somebody and they said, it would really help if you'd sit here with me while I tell my mom about this, or while I tell my sibling that I need some extra support. Really just asking what they need in that moment and making sure that they're safe in that moment. Yes. But then also saying, what do you really need right now? What can I do to actually help?
Yeah. And that's what I've seen kind of too, is a lot of times if somebody who doesn't typically isolates themselves, do you typically find that kind of breaking down that isolation is initially kind of a good idea of almost encouraging gathering together or encouraging being in community with that person?
I think it's a really good idea to ask that person how they view community. So somebody might actually get more stressed out and more sad thinking of, okay, now I've got to get up out of my bed. Maybe it's a phone call. Maybe what we do is we say, okay, I'm not going to meet you for coffee, but I'll call you. Would that help if I called you more often? Obviously you don't want to be that person's 100% support because they do need extra resources, right? We do need our social workers, our therapists around us. But if it would help them to have a call during the week or a check-in or a text or something, and you're comfortable providing that, that might be a good idea. Or maybe they do meet for coffee and they feel better. Maybe they do say, yeah, going out of my house helps me. And, phone calls really just don't help me. I am not a phone call person. And we do have a generation of young people growing up in that where calling is not okay. Like they're just not comfortable with it. And they would rather text, or they would rather Snapchat, or they would rather go out and, have coffee. And that's okay. Then we meet them where they're at.
Yeah. And that's something that I've started to see a little bit more of in, not only in my generation, but even skewing a little bit younger, towards like the 15 to 20 demo is you're seeing a lot of people shifting almost even further towards, instead of texting, things like audio messaging and, apps like Marco Polo and Snapchat, where yes, it's almost like a phone call, but there's not that pressure of it being a phone conversation of hello, body of conversation, having to wrap it up, having to hang up, going through that kind of process. You can still have those more in-depth conversations, over almost kind of a modified version of a video call. Have you seen that has kind of brought a little bit more encouragement, to those that may be kind of forcing themselves into isolation?
Yeah, a lot of people will tell me, I'm just not ready for that phone call, and maybe they've had suicidal thoughts, but they've agreed, okay, I'm going to be safe, but I just need some extra support. And so their friends actually, they reach out to them, and teens, they do support each other. Their circles of friends, they're like their family in a way, and it's really amazing to hear and really, hear what they have to say to each other as support. Hey, I'm here for you. You want to chat, you want to Snapchat, just for a few minutes. And to them, it really means connection. Again, coming at them from where they're at more than where we're at, where we think, as old people might think that, waiting and saying, okay, I'm going to call you, I'm going to meet you in person, might be more beneficial for us, may not be where the teens are at or younger.
Yeah. Yeah. And, growing up, we get this, the serious conversations from our parents, guardians, or youth leaders, whatever that may be, about, how to grieve death, how to console friends that are dealing with heartbreak or the loss of a loved one, or like you said, things like a loss of a pet, loss of a relationship. But the one thing that I see that kind of seriously lacks there in those kinds of conversations is, how do we address, hey, if you're in middle or high school and you have a friend that is dealing with depression, anxiety, or having suicidal thoughts, or maybe, in that stage of self-harm, how to have those conversations with our friends, kind of going back to that whole element of, okay, do we say it's going to be okay? Do we say that it's not going to be okay? Where, how do we connect step one to step two? All of those different kinds of things. What we hear a lot in today's age, whenever there is, any suicide, but in particular teen suicide, there's this, even in adults as well, is I had no idea. I had, I had no clue that person was, was depressed or was feeling those, those inner mental demons, or was feeling suicidal. So, how do we start that conversation out early on in adolescence or in those teen years, so that, as they enter into a stage where they encounter a friend or a classmate or a loved one or somebody in their community, in their church, whatever it may be, that is dealing with suicidal thoughts, what do we do early on so that whenever that time comes, we're able to have those conversations so that we aren't having those moments of, I had no idea that X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. I think that these conversations need to be had early, as soon as they possibly can be. Our little guys, even our elementary school students, they understand loss. They might not understand it in a way that a 20-year-old would or a 30-year-old would, but they understand loss. And so really, first off, having these conversations early, normalizing saying the word suicide and not running from it. And that is so important, just to say that word. It's vital. So talking about it up front and saying, if you feel this way or if someone else feels this way, they need to talk to a trusted adult, especially with our young people. They need to talk to anybody. And whoever that person is, as long as they're a trusted adult and those parents agree, okay, this is somebody that we can trust, like teachers or, school janitors, or maybe a coach of some sort, or a youth pastor, whatever, however they connect, And so talking about who are these resources. The other thing is really having these resources in our phones is such an important thing. All of us pretty much will have our phones on us at some point, right? And so having those numbers like the National Suicide Prevention Hotline are super important. or numbers that are specific for different groups of people that might benefit, right? So not everybody wants to call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, but they might want to call the Trevor Project, which is a great organization for young people in the LGBTQ community who can call and get some additional support as well. And they actually have a function where you can chat with somebody. Like you can actually type back and forth with somebody if you are not comfortable talking on the phone, which is incredible, just really incredible. So really having these resources, and then if you don't know what the resources are, looking them up. Looking them up together with our teens and saying, let's say one of your friends was feeling this way. Let's look up resources to see what you could provide for them, using it as a teaching moment. And if you don't know those resources, reaching out to the school counselors. Hey, what are your resources that you normally give out, that can help other people in the community? We're doing some education at home and, we're talking about this. It should be as normal as having the birds and the bees conversation. It really should. This should be a conversation that we have frequently, talking about it. Hey, how are you? Should be a serious question with serious answers, not just fine, okay, cool. Hey, if you're really not feeling those things, if you're really not feeling okay and fine, it would be okay to say different. It's okay to say, actually, I'm really not good. And I really do need to talk about this, and then if they give that answer, not shying away from it, not giving, a look of, oh no, I'm not ready for this, sitting there and actually saying, okay, tell me more. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about why you're not feeling good, and then not judging them for it. Right. And so what me might view as not important, or what me might view as, not influential to us to feel sad, might be different for somebody else. They might really feel sad over a loss of a pet significantly, but that might not affect us in the same way. But it might bring them to that point of, I wonder if it's really worth it. And, us talking about it without judgment and saying, okay, so I'm hearing that you're saying you're feeling this way. What can we do to help you right now? Do we need to call anybody? Do you have a plan? Asking that straightforward too. Do you have a plan to hurt yourself? And of course, making sure to call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room if they do have a plan and they are planning on hurting themselves, so that they can get further help. And not making it so scary sounding. That's a big thing. The hospital is there to help you. And a lot of people will say, oh, I can't say that. They're going to send me, somewhere. But saying to them, actually, they're going to give you resources, and it might help you, and it might change your life. And if you do have a plan, if we need to call 911, or if we need to take you to a hospital, that doesn't mean your life is over. That just means that right now we need additional support.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I, see is there's a little bit more conversation surrounding suicide when it comes to media for high schoolers and college aged, people. But, a lot of times you don't see it early on, like in childhood. Would you see there being a benefit for programs like Sesame Street, programs like, your Disney Junior shows and some of those kinds of programs tackling the topic of suicide?
Absolutely. I think it would be wonderful if we had those programs available, because, they are smart. These little guys, they're very intelligent, and they do listen into our conversations. And if there's a loss in the community, or if there's something that's changed, or if they've seen a TV show, they might have thoughts and opinions themselves. And so really, I think that we would really benefit from seeing that. Obviously, it would be different than, how teenagers would get that psychoeducation. But, it would be worth having that conversation with our littles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not only are we in a time where we're seeing a rise in suicides, in the rate of not only just suicide, but suicidal thoughts and folks that are dealing with suicidal thoughts, we're also in an opioid epidemic. And there are a lot of studies that suggest that there's a link between substance abuse and higher suicide rates, or at least suicidal thoughts. Do you often come across that link whenever you are in your work?
So I think that there's definitely a struggle with opioid use, and definitely a struggle with depression. And what some people may suggest is, okay, I need to self-medicate. I don't feel in a good space. I do not feel good, and I'm trying to problem solve out of this, and I just can't. Maybe they haven't had the mental health resources. Maybe they haven't had the help that they really did need. Maybe they don't know that there are people out there that can listen to them, or that, it can even be affordable or anything like that. So sometimes what people may do is they may say, okay, well, I need to solve this problem myself, and this is available. And this is what I can do. But really, they do have a lot available. There are free resources. There are hotlines. There are a lot of things that we can find for people if they need the help. And it's really reaching out and saying, hey, there's another way. And, we have these resources. Would you like to try this? Would you like to try talking about what's making you feel in this way? You don't need to self-medicate. And I don't mean to say that everybody who uses opioids is thinking about suicide, but there are some people who may choose the self-medication because they just feel that sad and that depressed, and they just don't see a way out. And so, to feel numb may feel better in that moment, right? And so what we really need to do is say, okay, well, these other resources are available. Let's work through this as a team, and let's not taboo the subject. Let's not assume that, the opioids are causing all of this, right? Let's say you do have depression, and let's say you do have sadness in your life, and let's talk about it and work through it as a team.
Mm-hmm. And, over the last couple of weeks when we've talked about depression and anxiety and, the pandemic's impact on mental health as a whole, one of the topics that's been brought up every single time is self-care. How we can incorporate self-care into our daily routine to help if we're dealing with anxiety, if we're dealing with depression, or if we're entering a new stage, post-pandemic or coming out of getting a vaccine and all those different things. How does self-care connect with suicide, with suicidal thoughts? If somebody's experiencing suicidal thoughts, or, how can somebody then, take self-care to a friend or a loved one that is dealing with suicidal thoughts and say, hey, maybe this will work to kind of help, or to help treat how you're feeling?
Mm-hmm. Self-care is what we consider to be a protective factor. So protective factors, think of them like a shield or a suit of armor. And so they protect us and they help us to go through our everyday stressors. And so when we don't have our armor on in the battle of everyday life, we aren't fully prepared at times. And so having that self-care is super important. Whatever that looks to that person struggling with thoughts, like we said earlier, it could be a meal, it could be a shower, it could be meditation, or it could be kickboxing class. It could be whatever is their self-care at the moment. Self-care for some people is, I want to sit and read a book and not be near another human right now. And that's okay. But for some people, self-care is, I want to hang around all my friends and I want to talk about sports, or I want to talk about the latest movie, and I just need to not think about my stressors right now. And so self-care is so important as that protective factor against suicide. All of us have this self-care routine, our self-care needs. And so if our needs aren't being met, really, that's when we start to worry, okay, what do I need to do to increase my self-care to feel like me again?
Mm-hmm. And, I know that, personally, I put myself in the category of being somewhere between an introvert and extrovert. And so obviously during the pandemic, I was kind of in that spot where I was like, okay, I'm enjoying this alone time of, getting, like you said, getting that chance to just be away from everyone and read a book, or, just have that alone time. But then, of course, on the other hand, I was like craving that time with a crowd, obviously with, DJing events and doing weddings and things like that. I've been like, man, I just want to play music. Like the first gig back for me was like a 15-year-old's birthday party. And I was like, sign me up, I'm in, because I want to be around people. But there is that back and forth kind of factor. And obviously now, we're entering into a new phase of society as a whole, really, where, the restrictions are starting to loosen up. A lot more people are vaccinated. The rate of transmission of the virus is starting to go down. And so we're starting to see, for lack of a better way to put it, because I feel like it's being repeated nonstop into the ground, the light at the end of the tunnel. And for some people, that is a celebratory thing. A lot of people are seeing that and they're like, yes, I get to go out and do X, Y, and Z. We get to throw parties again, the barbecues, the fireworks, all this kind of stuff. But there's also a good cluster of people that are sitting there and they're like, I don't really want to get out yet. Or there's the people that are kind of anxious about, okay, well, what does this all mean? You know, is it really safe for me to get out there? You know, how do I be social again? How do I get involved in community once again? And it's kind of like, you know, you're almost the new kid in a school again, and you're entering into those crowds of, what do I do? You know, how does this work? And so for the community of people that are still in isolation mode, you know, as we start to enter a mode where you no longer have to be isolated in a physical location, how can we help those that are still craving continuing isolation and make sure that isolation doesn't lead to depression, anxiety, or suicidal thoughts?
You know, I think you're right. We are entering this time of, you know, transition. And I think it's important, first of all, to be patient with that person. You know, don't invite them to a big party and, you know, kind of put them on the spot. That's most likely not going to help that person. You know, I think taking your time with them, reaching out in different kinds of ways, you know, like whether it's Snapchat or Marco Polo or a text or a call or whatever it is, you know, even just small little doses of interaction. And then really asking them, hey, you know, what kind of interaction would help you? What kinds of things do you miss? Maybe modifying it a bit even. Okay, maybe they don't want to go out with 7 people to a dinner. Maybe they just want to go out just with you for lunch. Not during a prime time. And that's okay. Modifying things and saying it's okay to take the smaller steps for whatever you feel comfortable for with COVID and with the, you know, re-entry into the what does it look like now stage and that transition. The other thing is, you know, maybe this person is an introvert and we're just really not aware of it, you know, and they really just need space that day. And understanding that maybe on Wednesdays, they like to stay in and read their book and watch their TV. And maybe you need to try them on a Thursday instead, you know, and that would be okay. Just being their support and meeting them where they're at in that moment and really not expecting them to meet our expectations of what we view as appropriate, because what we view as appropriate, you know, may not be where they're at this point and what they need and what they view as appropriate for them.
Mm-hmm. And you had put together a blog for Brooklane's website and actually did a great interview video a few weeks ago to kick off Mental Health Awareness Month about this exact thing, about breaking down the stigma of suicide and better understanding it and better understanding how to talk about it with others. And the 4 main components that you had introduced were listening, learning, respecting, and understanding. Run through those with us, you know, for the stream today, and just, you know, how we can utilize those 4 pieces to the puzzle to continue these kinds of conversations with our friends, with our loved ones, with our coworkers, our colleagues, of, again, tackling the topic of suicide head on.
Sure. Yeah. So the first part is always to listen. You know, I talked a little bit before about The Rabbit Who Listened. It's a wonderful book. It's a children's book, and it kind of reviews the story about this boy who has his tower of cards fall, and basically saying that, you know, in this story, there's a lot of animals because, you know, animals can talk in a children's book. So all these animals come up and they talk to this boy and they say, you know, all these different things about how they view this boy's problem solved. And this boy really does not take to any of these different solutions or ideas. But there is one creature, a rabbit, who sits next to the boy and really doesn't judge, really doesn't say anything to him, but just simply sits and listens to him. And then the book kind of goes from there. And so that first part, the listening part, is so crucial. We really want to see is people being open to listening to that person without interruption, judgment, or without really judgment at all. So that first listening is super important, and understanding where they're coming from, understanding their story, understanding, okay, this person's here right now, and that's okay. I'm not going to panic right now. I'm going to sit with them and really accept where they're at and talk to them about it and see what we can do to help them stay safe for now. That's the biggest thing. How can I help you? You know, and then the other part is respecting what they have to say without really putting our input in it. without really saying you're wrong, or that's not that big of a deal, or, really you're crying about that, without any of those negative comments, really thinking to yourself, what is this person genuinely feeling? And even if it's different from how I would react to this situation, I need to hear this out. And I need to hear this out without saying anything about problem solving, or let's fix this, or yeah, I'm sure she'll take you back, or yeah, the fish, that passed away, maybe it would have been a bigger deal if it's a dog or whatever. To this person, the fish or the breakup is the big deal. And, talking to them about it and saying, okay, let me hear you out. This was really important to you. Where are you coming from this? How can I help you? Education is super important too. I am certainly no expert. I just am a professional learner, is what I say. I'm a professional student. And so, I view myself as always learning. And I feel like everybody really does have the opportunity to ever learn about this subject, because it's ever growing. We're getting more and more data and more information. I recently did the ASSIST program. So I am a provisional trainer, and basically it's suicide first aid prevention. And so they have other programs too. They have programs that are online, virtual, for our virtual folks that may want to, watch a program and really learn about how they can help. That might be just a few hours, or they have more intensive programs. They really do have a lot to offer, as well as, reading statistics or reading facts or reading how can I help people information on different organization websites like save.org or suicideprevention.org, the Mental Health Association. Any of those really will provide you with very good information. And the other thing is really just meeting them where they are at. That's the biggest thing. Really just meeting them where they are at. And of course, making sure that you and that person are safe. We want to definitely say, okay, if this person has harmed themselves or somebody else, we need to call somebody and make sure everybody's safe. Or we need to go to the nearest emergency room and really make sure that everybody is safe. And knowing that that's an okay step to do. That's okay. And it's okay to take that step. And it doesn't mean that person's life is over if they go to the hospital, or that they're never going to come out of the hospital or anything like that. It just simply means that right now we need more expertise. We need more assistance with somebody that has the training to sit with this person and say, what resources would help with this? What can we do?
Mm-hmm. That's huge. I mean, this entire conversation alone, I've learned so much. And I think that's something that carrying over into those who watch and listen to this as well is only the beginning of the education, the respecting, the understanding, and listening that is so crucial to being able to have these conversations about suicide and knocking down that wall that we can't talk about it, that it's, you hear the word suicide and you jump or you scoot back away from the topic. These are the kinds of things that, it's the kickstart to those kinds of conversations. And so Shannon, just thank you so much for being a wealth of knowledge, but also being, a great leader for moving us into a time where we can have these conversations and it's a comfortable conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having me. And, I really appreciate everybody who's taken the time to listen to this. It's such an important topic.
Thanks again for listening, guys. If you want any resources on any of the topics discussed during our mental health check-in series, be sure to visit our station websites or brooklane.org.